So when we when we start filling up the market housing bucket, how do we do that if there's not enough affordable housing? How do we do that? And how do we affect change in that area?
Well, that's interesting. That's part of how I met Dan. I wanted to talk with him. We at the Cornerstone have been in the process of developing what we're calling an affordable housing task force, and Dan has done some of that work. I don't know if you can talk a little bit about what that group looked like for you in Westmoreland County.
Yeah, I mean, I think, a large part of that was bringing together several of those different providers and taking a look at what other resources weren't we tapping into in our county and how we might leverage those together a little bit differently. So building out, I'm not sure if Beaver has the lead-based paint initiative funds, if the county's applied for those.
I think we do.
We tied those to healthy home grant communities and some fair funding. They've blended funding streams to be able to do more. So rather than just abating lead when we go into a home or a project, we can look at windows and roofs and HVAC and electrical and bring a home up to code. And that can be done for homeowners in order to preserve property they could eventually turn out in the market. Can be that are low income. It can be for landlords that have units, as long as they preserve that as an affordable renting unit. And we're now in a position where originally those started as some low interest loans, and we're able to do a lot more granting with those. So the incentive to kind of come back and buy in, we've aligned a lot of those resources also with our redevelopment authority and our land bank. So trying to connect what we're doing on that side with blight remediation to begin with, and saying, can we be more thoughtful about, rather than just going and buying property, land bank just takes ownership of property, raises the house, and we end up with an empty lot. And that's traditionally, when you look at a lot of land banks in communities, that's what they become. Our land bank is in a position where they're gifting properties now back, so we can do affordable housing design on. Which is great, because then that's a low entry point for somebody to come in.
Can I ask, gifting it to whom?
So you
to
can
an organization.
You can do an organization, and so you can see public-private partnerships. So you can bring in folks who want to invest money and have rental income. Because the question is always, where do you get the money?
Yeah.
Where do you get the money?
At the end of the day.
And so there are grant programs, and you can bridge some of those low-income tax credit projects and some of those other things in with private investment, and you can have relationships between nonprofit and for-profit entities on a percentage basis. And when you're able to acquire those properties then at no value, it's a great asset to have to incentivize folks to come in. Where we're still struggling on that front is, Pennsylvania, it's municipality based, right? So some of the challenges we addressed earlier about we can't have certain types of programs. Certain communities also don't want multifamily complexes built in their communities. They don't want affordable, or what would be traditionally defined as affordable housing.
Which is what?
Well, it depends on what funding stream and market and what you're tapping into. But the idea is that you're making that at or below market rate in the community, and each funding source has a differentiation. We've been really focused on trying to rebrand affordable housing and get away from that terminology, and really talking about this is workforce housing, right? So thinking about the idea
that's gold right there.
Yeah, it's workforce housing. It's the people in your community who need to be housed and live close and have access to where they're working and where their kids go to school and where the grocery stores are. And so because we know there are a lot of historical connections to that term affordable housing, we know there's a lot of racism attached to that term affordable housing. It creates barriers in conversation. And so changing that narrative and calling it workforce housing allows you to go, and people stop. What do you mean? Tell me more about that. That's where the nurses are. The nurses' aides, the home health care people, the people that were working in the shelters and supporting the other folks that aren't making tens of dollars, your grocer, right? Your bank teller, right? This is where they're living in community. And in some neighborhoods, that's teachers, right? You look at school district starting rates now in some communities, right? This is your workforce housing, and it changes that tone. So we're really trying to get that message. out there in a broader way, because that opens the door when you're talking to municipalities, right? They don't put the wall up immediately. We have a long way to go, of course, but we're at least putting the partners together. And that's, I think, what you were talking
Yes.
about, is bringing those voices together, because
The task force.
when you're trying to do it on your own, the land bank has one vision.
We want to get that back on the payroll.
Correct.
Thing, yeah, tax.
That's their thing, right?
Yeah.
Let's get these properties and move. Well, the problem is that they didn't have a partner. They were just sitting on a bunch of land, undeveloped, unused, right? Municipalities want money, but they're trying to be controlling. So it's like, well, let's bring the municipality partner in and talk about what this is and change that language. And when they can have buy-in and they own it, it goes a lot better, because then you can get those private developers in. And that's where you can bring in some really good investment, because you don't have to go fundraise.
Right.
That's the hardest part of affordable housing, is fundraising. I will tell you, I've seen
It's costly.
it's costly.
I've learned that.
I've seen communities really think differently about that. I've seen the faith community in some areas in particular, some of the larger churches, right, where we have, large church communities that sit in pockets sometimes, thinking about building a church and putting, that housing above the church, right? So now we have a place where folks can gather and be, and we can reach them through that calling that we have as a faith community. But at the same time, now they have access to, there's a little cafeteria place they can shop in. They have housing that's affordable, right? We're building community and thinking differently. It's hard in towns. Like, I was trying to pay attention as I was driving in. We built communities where we had storefronts on the first floor and apartments on the second. And so many places, those second, third floor units now are out of code and not compliant. And so, being able to think about how can we infuse and connect to those, and we're doing that. Some of our municipality, Latrobe, is doing that really well, trying to identify funding to help. We're going to do facelifts on all the properties, right? Make them pretty. And we're going to help you try to find funding in grants to bring your building up to code, so you can have tenants in here. That's generating an income source for the property owner, which is oftentimes, those are your small entrepreneurial businesses that are buying up or renting out these spaces, right? And so it's giving them the opportunity to also generate revenue and create solvency and buy-in in the community. And we've had some private developers do that. We want to open an ice cream shop, which I never thought would take off. It's a little sandwich ice cream shop, but they actually built in the back an area in their own business area that's a yard, because it's an old converted house. So they have housing and then their ice cream shop, and they have yard games and places for folks to gather. And so it's as a nonprofit, it's hard, but when you can leverage others, we had another person who converted. They were business, and the business that was there moved out. It was like convenience store, newsstand kind of thing. And when they were rebuilding that to move into the next business, we said, what really is needed here is a low cost laundromat. Would you consider putting in a laundromat? And here's these tenants that really need access. Yeah, we can put a laundromat in, because they're going to make money on that. But not at a price that's the same as this laundromat that's 5 miles away that nobody can get to because we don't have good transportation. And so it's just having those conversations and creating in the community what folks need.
And that's what the task force that we're developing, will be launching this summer, will be doing. We'll be bringing those people together. We'll be having that dialogue, and we'll be looking to influence and impact how the community thinks about workforce housing. I love that term. We are seeing some of that come into our community, and there is some misunderstanding about what it means and what it looks like. But again, looking at the community more broadly and looking at ensuring that it's a healthy community that's supportive of all, and all factions of the community are being heard and they're communicating, and ensuring that it's on the table as we discuss where our communities go. I know here in our county, we're just launching our 10-year plan. We've been out looking at the plans and what's coming, ensuring with our leadership and both in the county and in the municipalities, that they understand that we really understand what we're dealing with in our community, what the demographic of our community is, and making sure that everybody's needs are being met. We want to bring families, and we want home ownership, and we want schools, and we want business. I get that. And we just need to make sure that the dialogue and the consideration is being given, that there's an opportunity, again, for all to make it a really rich and healthy, diversified community.
Well, and the issue too is as we grow and we bring in families and businesses and things, it also grows the homelessness problem.
Potentially, yep.
It potentially grows the food insecurity problem. And I mean, it's growing all of those. So, I think it's really important for the people who are doing the economic and community development to be talking with the people who are providing the services, because you need to have the infrastructure of service provision to adequately meet the needs of the people who are going to be moving into the county. Yes.
However,
Yes.
you don't know what the needs could become until you're there.
Well,
Well, parts
true,
in the plan,
but you have to be at least ready to move instead of saying, oh, we
Correct.
should get
Sort of
together and
reacting.
talk
Yeah,
about this.
yeah,
And that's what we're
Reaction's never
hoping the task
Yeah.
force will be able to do. Will be able to help us to be intentional and strategic and collaborative in working, again, with folks that you may not see yourself sitting at the table with, and having a seat and a voice at that table together, collectively and collaboratively, to impact and influence and educate each other in all directions, right? In that. And that's why Dan and what was happening in Westmoreland County was of such piqued my interest.
Yeah, I'll share stories. It's interesting. Not having the right people at the table can create challenges. There's been historically housing developments that have gone up, and access to transportation is always a challenge depending on the population that you're serving. And we have very limited transportation network in our community. So we've had these housing developments come up, and then they've reached out to the transit authority and said, hey, we'd love to have a bus stop here. They're like, well, that's wonderful. We'd love to have a bus stop there too, but you didn't build any way for us to bring a bus in and turn around and do this, right? So not having the right partners at the table can create future challenges. And so having those there and saying, well, how does transportation fit into housing? Well, it does, because we want to link that. And how does workforce development tie into housing? Where does the education system sit? Where does the faith community sit